It's a title that has become almost ubiquitous in the cultural lexicon of the last decade, Attack on Titan. This is a phenomenon that has shattered the often insular boundaries of Japanese animation, erupting into the global consciousness as a veritable popular tidal wave. Isayama's masterwork has captivated over 100 million viewers and readers, reaching far beyond its expected audience to ensnare individuals who typically hold little interest in the world of manga. Like many, I once fell into that category, not from any intellectual disdain for this vital part of Japanese culture, but from a practical apprehension. I was daunted by the sheer scale of many manga-adapted stories, some sprawling across hundreds of episodes, and feared embarking on an interminable epic. However, at the persistent urging of a friend who assured me of the story's concise and meticulously planned nature, I was convinced to delve into the tragic and brutal world of Eren Yeager. Whether one considers its stark artistic direction, its labyrinthine plot, or its masterful pacing, Attack on Titan stands as an outstanding work of art that has firmly cemented its place in the pantheon of modern pop culture. It is no exaggeration to state that, alongside Game of Thrones, it is one of the fictional universes that has most intensely ignited the passions and debates of the past decade. This monumental success is no mere coincidence or fortunate alignment of celestial bodies. It is the direct result of Isayama's unparalleled mastery of narrative craft. While his raw, often visceral drawing style may not be lauded in the same vein as the intricate artistry of a Kentaro Miura, few storytellers can claim to possess Isayama's prodigious talent for weaving a tale. What truly distinguishes his work is the meticulous and frequent distillation of crucial clues from seemingly innocuous moments. These details, which often appear insignificant upon a first viewing, later re-emerge as pivotal revelations that reframe the entire narrative. This intricate foreshadowing makes revisiting the series armed with the knowledge of its ultimate truths, an immensely rewarding experience as every piece of the puzzle clicks seamlessly into place. A compelling story thrives on its secrets, a principle Isayama understands intimately. He keeps his audience perpetually on edge, caught in a web of interwoven mysteries where each resolution only serves to spawn a host of new, more profound questions. Attack on Titan is a ruthless narrative that consistently subverts expectations. Just when we believe we are beginning to grasp the stakes, it masterfully reveals its true, far more devastating theme. The discovery of the world beyond the walls is a paradigm-shifting moment. Those who believe themselves to be the last remnants of humanity learn that civilization has indeed prospered, but it harbors a deep-seated, institutionalized hatred for the people of Paradise Island. The narrative transforms from a post-apocalyptic struggle against monstrous titans into a profound and chilling reflection on the cyclical nature of hatred and violence that has defined human history. Isayama's work draws stark and deliberate parallels with our own world. The final arcs of the story adopt a haunting World War II aesthetic. While the persecution and segregation of Eren's people, the Eldians, are a clear and powerful allegory for the atrocities committed against Jewish people in the 20th century. Beginning with the intimate tragedy of a young boy witnessing his mother's horrific death, the Japanese author relentlessly expands the scope, plunging us into the throes of a 1,000-year-old conflict fueled by inherited resentment and a catastrophic failure to communicate. Ultimately, Attack on Titan forces us to confront an unsettling question in devoting ourselves wholly to a cause, even one we believe to be just. Do we risk becoming slaves to our own ideals? Are we perpetuating the very hatred we seek to eradicate? The story doesn't offer easy answers, only the painful truth that freedom itself can become a prison when it is wielded without understanding, humility, or compassion. In the end, Isayama delivers not just a story, but a mirror, one that reflects the beauty and savagery of humanity, the courage and cowardice within us all, and the price we pay for the stories we choose to believe. Attack on Titan unfolds in a grim world where humanity teeters on the brink of extinction. Decimated by mysterious, towering creatures known as Titans, the last vestiges of mankind have retreated behind 3 immense concentric walls. Each rising over 50 meters high, these walls are not just physical barriers, they are symbols of desperation built to keep terror at bay. Behind them, society has regressed into a rudimentary, almost medieval existence. Life is rigid, confined, and governed by fear. The world beyond remains a mystery, inhabited only by bloodthirsty giants who prowl the land like apex predators. For those inside, freedom is a distant memory. They are trapped not by chains, but by the terrifying unknown that looms beyond the stone. We first enter this world through the eyes of a young boy, Eren Yeager. Living in the outer district of Shiganshina with his friends Mikasa Ackerman and Armin Arlert, Eren is not content with survival. He is curious, impatient, and filled with a longing to see what lies beyond the horizon. His imagination is stoked by Armin's tales, stories from contraband books that speak of vast oceans, deserts, mountains, and snow-covered lands. To Eren, the walls are not safety, they are a slaughterhouse pen, corralling humans like livestock until their inevitable end. He dreams not of comfort, but of breaking free, of living, not just existing. But that dream dies quickly. In the very first episode, a Titan unlike any seen before, taller than the walls themselves, materializes out of thin air and kicks a gaping hole into the perimeter. This is the Colossal Titan, a terrifying harbinger of destruction. Beside him, a second Titan appears, smaller in stature but encased in armor like skin. The Armored Titan. Their sudden, unexplained assault marks the end of a century of uneasy peace. Within moments, Titans flood into Shiganshina, turning the district into a feast of screams and gore. Buildings crumble, lives are crushed, and Eren, powerless, watches his mother die, devoured alive by a grotesque, smiling Titan. The innocent boy who once dreamed of ice fields and freedom is consumed by grief. In that instant, curiosity turns to hatred. From that day forward, Eren is no longer just a child. He becomes a vessel of vengeance. Determined to destroy every last Titan, he flees to safety with Mikasa and Armin, but his mind remains on the battlefield. Years pass. Refugees adapt. Eren trains. Alongside other displaced children, he enlists in the army, vowing to take the fight to the monsters that stole his mother and his future. This is where Attack on Titan leans into the shonen genre's narrative structure, where young protagonists face overwhelming enemies and grow stronger with every trial. But Isayama's work bends that formula towards something darker. This is not a coming-of-age story in the traditional sense. It's a confrontation with war trauma and the irreversible cost of violence. Eren and his peers are not simply heroes. They are children forged into soldiers, molded by loss and weaponized by a world with no other answers. At the heart of this narrative is Eren Yeager himself, a complex, volatile, and ultimately tragic figure. He represents more than one boy's struggle. He embodies the brutal collision between innocence and the horrors of reality. His trauma runs deeper than the death of a parent. When Eren later learns the ultimate truth, that humanity exists outside the walls and that his people, the Eldians, are not victims of extinction, but objects of hatred. It shatters what remains of his identity. The rest of the world, led by the Marley Empire, views Eldians not as survivors, but as threats. Cursed by history, feared for their inherited ability to transform into Titans, the Eldians are treated as devils incarnate. The parallels to 20th century history are unmistakable. Isayama draws a haunting comparison to the Nazi regime's systematic dehumanization of the Jewish people. In particular, the Eldians' portrayal mirrors the anti-Semitic propaganda disseminated through films like The Eternal Jew, 1940, which likened Jews to rats, accused them of societal sabotage, and framed them as irredeemable villains. Similarly, the Eldians are called devils, cursed blood, and spawn of evil, not by monsters, but by humans. The very people who persecute them are rational beings, capable of thought, empathy, and cruelty in equal measure. This is one of the series' most harrowing truths. The real horror is not the Titans. It's the capacity for hatred within humanity itself. By stripping away the fantasy elements, Attack on Titan reveals a story that is disturbingly real. One where the lines between victim and oppressor blur, where history is weaponized, and where people justify genocide with myths passed down through generations. Eren, who once saw the Titans as monsters to destroy, comes to realize that his greatest enemies wear no fangs and have no claws. They wear uniforms and tell the world who deserves to live and who must die. It is through this relentless chain of events that Eren Yeager is forged. A character as multifaceted as he is tragic. At different points in the story, he inhabits wildly contrasting roles: a curious and idealistic child, a determined soldier fueled by vengeance, a radical leader willing to make unimaginable sacrifices, and eventually, a figure of apocalyptic destruction who paradoxically still represents hope to some. He is a paradox, a person who embodies conflicting truths, shaped not by a single moment, but by the accumulation of trauma, revelation, and impossible choices. Eren is not easily understood, particularly in the final arc, where his identity fractures under the weight of foreknowledge. With access to memories from the past and future, he becomes a prisoner of inevitability, a boy cursed to walk a path he believes has already been written. To many viewers, he becomes everything and nothing all at once: savior and destroyer, protagonist and villain, human and myth. Yet the essence of this complexity was never hidden. When Eren kills the men attempting to traffic a young Mikasa, his nature is revealed, both compassionate and feral, capable of extraordinary empathy and terrifying violence. He has always lived with this internal dissonance. An altruistic desire to protect clashing against a deep well of rage ready to explode when provoked. His life has been a constant push and pull between the idealist he wants to be and the weapon the world demands he become. As the story progresses and the veil of the world is lifted, Eren is faced with a horrifying truth. His people, the Eldians, are not victims of a post-apocalyptic accident. They are the target of systemic hatred on a global scale. Faced with the knowledge that the outside world will never accept them, he chooses the path of preemptive violence. In his eyes, it is not a matter of morality, but survival. What follows is a descent into moral ambiguity. Eren gathers those loyal to him, not as comrades in hope, but as instruments of a ruthless strategy. He commits atrocities not because he enjoys them, but because he has calculated them to be necessary. He no longer collaborates, he manipulates. He no longer seeks understanding, he imposes consequence. The boy who once sought to destroy monsters becomes one in the eyes of many, flipping the narrative on its head, too. The hunted becomes the hunter. Even his very name foreshadows this arc. As Clay Drapeau notes in Beyond the Walls of Attack on Titan, Eren is Turkish for holy person, a fitting title for the wide-eyed child who once dreamt of saving humanity. Jäger, derived from the German word for hunter, reveals the other half of his soul. He begins his journey seeking to hunt Titans, too. By the end, he turns that same fury against the entire world. His transformation isn't a betrayal of who he is. It is the fulfillment of a destiny that was inscribed into him from birth. And yet, despite everything, it's difficult to condemn him outright. We've seen his story unfold in all its nuance. He was never a symbol of perfect morality. He was fragile, deeply human, often mistaken. He wept, doubted, and stumbled, but he never stopped moving forward. And that is perhaps what made others see him as a messianic figure, a man so convinced of his path that others followed, even as it led into the abyss. His radical turn is not born from inherent evil. It is the logical endpoint of a world that never tried to break the cycle of violence. Eren is the consequence of generations of inherited rage, of sins passed down and never atoned for. First a prisoner of the walls, then a prisoner of the island. Two, he is no more free than the children caught in real-world geopolitical maelstroms. He bears resemblance to the child caught between modern-day tragedies, like the young Palestinian trapped between the extremism of Hamas and the crushing policies of an apartheid regime. 2. These children do not choose their roles in history. They inherit them. They become symbols and statistics before they even understand the world. Eren is no different. He is not the architect of hatred. He is what hatred builds when no one dares to stop it. To borrow an image from Jim Harrison's Legends of the Fall, Eren is like water that seeps into a rock and freezes. When the rock eventually splits, 2. It is not the water's fault. It is simply doing what it was always going to do. Eren doesn't break the world out of malice, but because no one prevented the cracks from forming. His true crime is believing that freedom must come through annihilation. That liberation must be absolute, even if it means becoming what he once swore to destroy. His story asks a terrifying question. In a world built on endless conflict, can anyone pursue freedom without becoming a tyrant? Is Eren a monster, or simply the inevitable result of a monstrous world? For Isayama, storytelling is not merely about action or spectacle, it's about sustaining curiosity. A compelling narrative in his eyes must never rest. It should evolve constantly, layering mystery atop revelation, keeping the audience in a state of engaged uncertainty. From the very beginning, Attack on Titan is engineered with this philosophy. Although it begins with a seemingly simple premise, a boy driven by vengeance, it quickly reveals itself to be a carefully constructed labyrinth of secrets, ideologies, and shifting perspectives. Crucially, Isayama didn't improvise his way through the story. He had a clear roadmap in mind long before the first chapter was published. What begins as a straightforward tale of survival slowly morphs into a dense geopolitical thriller, using one of literature's oldest and most effective techniques, foreshadowing. Foreshadowing in Attack on Titan isn't heavy-handed, it's surgical. Isayama scatters subtle clues throughout the narrative, embedding them so seamlessly into the storytelling that they often escape our notice on first viewing. But once the veil is lifted, the brilliance becomes clear. The early episodes of Season 1, and especially the early stretch of Season 2, exemplify this technique. When the shocking truth is finally revealed, that Reiner Braun and Bertolt Hoover are, in fact, the armored and colossal titans, it doesn't feel like a deus ex machina. Instead, it feels like a reawakening. The signs were always there. Their titanic forms even bear physical similarities to their human appearances. And upon rewatching, every line of dialogue, every glance, and every moment of hesitation takes on new significance. One of the most striking examples occurs during the battle at Utgard Castle. Amid chaos, Reiner offhandedly references a herring, a saltwater fish. On its own, the moment seems innocuous, even forgettable. But the people within the walls have no knowledge of the sea. For Reiner to recognize a marine creature is a narrative fracture, unless, of course, he is not truly from within the walls. What at first seems like a plot hole becomes a meticulously placed breadcrumb. These subtle details invite the viewer to question everything they thought they knew. Clues aren't just there for shock value. They reward a deeper structural purpose. They reward attentiveness and rewatching. More importantly, they echo the central theme of the series. Truth is hidden, but always present, waiting to be unearthed. This approach also creates a strong emotional bond between the audience and the characters. The people of Paradise Island live in darkness, surrounded by myths and false histories. Like them, we start off with no knowledge of the larger world. We share their confusion, their fear too, and their desire for answers. As they inch closer to understanding the world beyond the walls, we journey with them. Every discovery they make about the Titans, about the ocean, about the world's hatred toward Eldians is our discovery, too. Much of the early narrative revolves around one major question. What's in Eren's basement? 2. This singular objective becomes the narrative fulcrum of the first part of the series. It's not just about uncovering the secret of the Titans, It's about uncovering the secret of the world itself. And when they finally reach it, too, when they discover that humanity is alive and thriving across the ocean, the revelation is as jarring to the viewer as it is to the characters. Because we've grown up alongside these warriors, Eren, Makas, Armin, and the rest, their shock becomes ours. Like them, too, we believed the Titans were the greatest evil. Like them, we assumed humanity was nearly extinct. But the truth is more complicated and more devastating. The world is not saved, it's indifferent. Worse, it despises the people of the walls. Not for what they've done, but for what they represent, the Eldian bloodline, cursed with the ability to become Titans. This truth reframes the entire conflict. The enemy is no longer just a monstrous giant, it is prejudice, propaganda, and generational hatred. And by the time we realize this, we're already too deep in the story to remain neutral. We feel the betrayal. We feel the outrage. We stand with Eren, not because we condone his actions, but because we understand the emotional trajectory that brought him to the edge. Isayama doesn't just guide us through a story, he slowly aligns our perception with the characters. Attack on Titan becomes more than an anime or manga. It transforms into an epistemological journey, a meditation on how truth is uncovered and how dangerous it can be once found. The world's deep-seated hatred toward the Eldians is not arbitrary. It is the residue of a long and bloody history. For nearly 2,000 years, Eldia used the terrifying power of the Titans to dominate other nations, forging an empire built on conquest and subjugation. This supremacy came to an end after the Great Titan War, when the Eldians were finally pushed back by the emerging Marley Empire. The surviving remnant, led by King Karl Fritz, retreated to Paradise Island, leaving the rest of the world behind. But this retreat was no mere tactical withdrawal, it was a philosophical renunciation, too. Overwhelmed by the sins of his ancestors and ashamed of the atrocities committed in Eldia's name, King Fritz resolved that such a legacy could not be redeemed. Instead of seeking revenge or reconciliation, he chose erasure. He wiped the memories of his people, cloaking them in ignorance behind 3 towering walls. 2, hoping that they could live out their days in false peace until the day came when the world would no longer tolerate their silence. This act of denial became a national myth, a carefully crafted illusion. Within the walls, the Eldians remembered themselves not as former conquerors, but as victims. Their understanding of history was filtered through propaganda that portrayed their progenitor, Ymir, as a divine figure, a goddess who brought prosperity to humanity. The brutal truth that this prosperity came through bloodshed and the enslavement of other nations via the power of the Titans was buried beneath generations of collective amnesia. As viewers, we are drawn into this narrative. We align ourselves with the Eldians, sympathizing with their confinement, rooting for their survival. The Marley Empire, in contrast, is framed with deliberate visual and thematic echoes of the Third Reich, militaristic, supremacist, and unrelenting in its persecution. Marley's racial ideology demands the segregation of Eldians into ghettos, strips them of rights, and indoctrinates them with the belief that they are inherently evil because of crimes committed centuries ago. Like in Nazi Germany, these victims are forced to serve the very empire that oppresses them while living under the constant threat of extermination. So when Eren Yeager begins his deadly campaign of retaliation, we hesitate to judge him. We watch his escalating violence with unease, but also with a sliver of understanding. He is not just attacking nations, he is striking back at an ideology that has long denied his people the right to live. In his eyes, there is no room left for compromise. The rest of the world will never stop hunting Eldians. He believes the only way to guarantee their safety is to eliminate the enemy entirely. 2. It's at this point that the story turns inward. When Eren gains the power of the founding Titan, he holds in his hands an almost godlike ability to reshape the world. He could have chosen restraint. Like a nuclear superpower, He might have adopted a strategy of deterrence, letting the world know that any attack would provoke an unimaginable retaliation. This, after all, was the logic that maintained a fragile peace during the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. But Eren refuses to gamble on fear alone. He knows that his time is limited. Any bearer of a founding Titan's power is cursed to die within 13 years. He understands he won't live long enough to maintain a lasting balance. That looming deadline drives him to a final, irreversible decision. Eren unleashes the rumbling, an apocalyptic march of colossal titans that threatens to flatten the world beyond paradise. It is not an act of conquest, but of obliteration. His goal is singular and absolute, to ensure that those he loves will never again live in fear. To him, genocide is a necessary evil, a firewall against the possibility of future persecution. When the truth finally emerges, it stuns not just the world, but his own friends and allies. The people closest to him had clung to the belief that peace was still possible. That Eren, despite everything, could be reasoned with. But by then, it is too late. The boy they once knew has become a force of annihilation. And in the shadows of his march, a new doctrine begins to take root on paradise, militaristic, vengeful, and nationalist. His actions, no matter their intent, plant the seeds for another cycle of hate. The tragedy lies not only in what Eren does, but in how long it takes everyone, including us as viewers, to recognize what he has become. We were given the clues. The fear in his voice, the hardening in his eyes, the moments where love gave way to desperation, they were all there. But we were too focused on justifying his pain, too eager to see a hero where there was only a boy slowly being consumed by his trauma and ideals. By the time we understand what's happening inside Eren's heart, the world is already burning. As abhorrent as the Marley Empire's racial doctrine may be, it cannot be divorced from the historical trauma that shaped it. For centuries, the Marleys lived under the shadow of Eldian supremacy, a brutal epoch defined by Titan warfare and domination. While the exact conditions of their subjugation remain uncertain, what is clear is that the Eldian Empire, under the rule of the Fritz dynasty, expanded its borders through overwhelming force. The Eldians brought not just conquest, but transformation, aqueducts, medical knowledge, literature, and architectural marvels, but all of it was purchased with blood, the product of fear, compliance, and Titan-induced terror. The legacy of Eldian expansion bears a striking resemblance to that of Western colonial empires. Civilizational advancements came hand in hand with human suffering. Just as the rise of Europe was built upon the transatlantic slave trade and the genocide of indigenous peoples, so too was Eldia's prosperity rooted in the subjugation of others. And just as the modern West created its own myths to justify its ascendancy, the Marley Empire crafted the legend of Helos, the noble hero who ended the Age of Titans and liberated the world. This symbolic figure became the spiritual cornerstone of the New World Order, sanitizing past horrors and glorifying Marley's supremacy. In stark contrast, the Eldians of Paradise are left with nothing, not even their history. Their cultural memory is a blank slate, erased by King Fritz's decision to shield them from the weight of their ancestors' crimes. They live believing they are the last remnants of humanity, unaware that their identity has been forcibly stripped from them. Deprived of context, heritage, and global awareness, the people of Paradise become easy prey to fear and manipulation, just as the world outside becomes a breeding ground for resentment and myths. This fractured understanding leads to a fatal disconnect. When Eren's people are condemned for sins committed long before they were born, crimes they have no knowledge of, dialogue becomes impossible. There is no shared memory, no common truth to build upon. The result is inevitable, brutal, cyclical confrontation. Fear replaces empathy, and vengeance masquerades as justice. Attack on Titan doesn't simply depict this clash, it dissects it. War, in Isayama's world, is not glorified, it is rationalized. The narrative refuses to offer us a pure villain or an unblemished hero. Every character, no matter how righteous their cause may seem, is forced to compromise their morality for the sake of their nation, their people, or their ideals. The horror of war is normalized because it is so intimately tied to survival and progress. Success demands sacrifice, and sacrifice demands blood. As viewers, we watch each character cross lines they once swore they'd never approach. They lie, kill, betray, and manipulate, not for personal gain, but because they believe it is necessary. They are all soldiers of an abstract cause, convinced that their version of history, their interpretation of truth, is the only one that matters. But Attack on Titan offers no comfort in absolute truths. It teaches us that there are none. Every truth is a narrative. Every narrative is shaped by the teller, depending on whose eyes you look through. The same character can be seen as a martyr or a monster. A terrorist can become a revolutionary. A liberator can become a tyrant. The same name can echo with reverence or horror depending on who's speaking it. This is the series' most unsettling and most powerful lesson. Morality is contextual, perspective is everything, and in the chaos of conflict, even the noblest intentions can lead to catastrophe. From the very beginning, Attack on Titan presents Eren Yeager as its central figure, a young protagonist propelled by trauma, rage, and an unrelenting desire for freedom. He fits squarely into Joseph Campbell's concept of the hero with 1,000 faces, a universal archetype that appears across cultures in what Campbell called the monomyth. In these mythic structures, a hero embarks on a journey, crosses into unknown and hostile realms, confronts daunting trials, and ultimately returns transformed, bearing a gift, whether literal or symbolic, that has the power to reshape his world. In Eren's case, however, this journey is not a straight path toward enlightenment or salvation. Instead, Isayama subverts the classic arc, turning what should be a tale of liberation into a harrowing descent into moral ambiguity. Isayama structures Attack on Titan in 2 distinct acts, divided by a dramatic time skip. The temporal ellipsis, a common literary and cinematic technique found in works ranging from Samurai Jack to Cyrano de Bergerac, is more than a narrative device. It is a rupture, a deliberate fracture in continuity that forces the audience to reevaluate everything they thought they understood. For Isayama, the time skip isn't merely a convenient way to age characters or accelerate plot lines, it's a thematic mirror. It reflects not only the character's transformation, but also the story's ideological inversion. When we enter the 4th and final season, we are disoriented. Everything feels alien. The story opens not on Paradise Island, but in an unfamiliar battlefield, amidst a new cast of soldiers entrenched in a brutal war. Gone are the familiar streets of Shiganshina or the claustrophobic tension of life behind the walls. Instead, we're thrust into the heart of the Marley Empire, watching young Eldian conscripts fight a war that is not their own, against enemies they have no personal quarrel with. Initially, this shift is jarring. We want to return to the comfort of the Survey Corps, to the comrades we suffered and grew with. But that longing soon gives way to an unsettling curiosity. Who are these new characters? Why are they so familiar and yet so foreign? The narrative urges us to linger in this discomfort, to listen closely. Soon, we see familiar faces, Reiner Braun and Zeke Yeager, too, the traitors from seasons past. Yet their context has changed. No longer faceless villains, they are soldiers of the Marley regime. Tools in a propaganda machine that brands them honorary citizens, even as it condemns them to life in ghettos. The armbands they wear, the gates they're forced to pass through, the indoctrination they endure all evoke chilling parallels to real-world atrocities, particularly the treatment of Jewish people under the Nazi regime. And so, our moral compass begins to tilt. 2, we begin to feel sympathy for the Eldians who live under Marley control, people vilified for a bloodline they cannot change, who are taught to loathe their own identity, and who believe that by proving their usefulness. They might someday be forgiven for sins they never committed. We ask ourselves, why do they serve this brutal empire? Why do they harbor such hatred for the people of Paradise Island, who are, by all biological and historical accounts, their kin? The answer lies in the power of perspective. These mainland Eldians have grown up hearing a single version of history, a version in which the people of Paradise are devils, holdouts from a savage empire that once ruled the world through fear. They are taught that loyalty to Marley is redemption and rebellion is damnation. Their worldview is shaped by fear, shame, and the desperate hope that obedience will earn them a sliver of dignity. This ideological indoctrination mirrors the viewer's own journey. We, too, were once certain who the enemy was. In the early seasons, the Titans were monsters. The warriors were villains, too, and Eren was our righteous hero. But now the lines blur. With each passing episode, Isayama peels back another layer, revealing that the real antagonist isn't a specific nation or race, but the cycle of hatred itself, the inherited trauma that poisons entire generations. By placing us inside the enemy's camp, Attack on Titan asks us to consider the dangerous simplicity of a single narrative. It challenges us to question our assumptions, to recognize that morality in war is rarely black and white. Heroes become monsters, monsters carry burdens. And every truth is a matter of perspective. What began as a story of survival slowly reveals itself as a meditation on identity, history, and the tragic consequences of refusing to see through someone else's eyes. The narrative shift in Attack on Titan, where the story temporarily abandons its familiar protagonists to explore the enemy's point of view, bears a striking resemblance to the bold structural gamble of The Last of Us. Just when Ellie's path of vengeance reaches its bloodiest point, Neil Druckmann's game abruptly rewinds the clock, placing the player in control of Abby Anderson, the woman who killed Joel. For many players, this twist was nothing short of betrayal. Abby was the villain, the murderer of a beloved character. Switching to her perspective felt like a violation of narrative loyalty. Some even refused to continue playing, forfeiting nearly 15 hours of storytelling meticulously designed to humanize a supposed monster. What The Last of Us Part 2 tried to show, and what Attack on Titan accomplishes more seamlessly, is that moral clarity is often an illusion. For Abby, Joel wasn't a father figure or hero. He was the remorseless killer of her own father and comrades. His rescue of Ellie, an act that once seemed unequivocally righteous, can now be seen as a selfish decision that cost countless lives. The gray areas emerge when we're brave enough to step outside our own narrative and look through another's eyes. However, where Druckmann's twist felt sudden to many, largely because Abby's story was retrofitted into an existing universe, Isayama's change in perspective lands with far more weight and resonance. This is thanks to the long-term narrative architecture he had in place from the beginning. Reiner Braun isn't a late addition or a contrived moral foil. He has been part of the story since Eren's earliest steps into the military, quietly embedded in the framework of the plot and the hearts of viewers. By the time we learn that he is, in fact, the armored Titan, one of the very monsters responsible for the fall of Shiganshina, we feel not just betrayed, but deeply conflicted. Reiner wasn't just a face in the crowd. He was a trusted friend, a fellow soldier, someone we grieved with and fought beside. And yet, when the time comes to view the story from his perspective, disappointment is entangled with curiosity. How could someone who seemed so human, so loyal, have committed such horrific acts? Isayama invites us into that tension, forcing us to reckon with the idea that evil often wears a human face, and that every villain is the hero of their own story. In another world, Reiner Braun might have been the protagonist of Attack on Titan. In many ways, he mirrors Eren Eager, neither the most naturally gifted, nor the most brilliant, but both driven by an unbreakable will and a burning desire to protect. Both are scarred by the systems that raised them. Reiner, like Eren, is a product of indoctrination, a child of war raised in the Eldian ghetto of Liberio, fed a steady diet of propaganda that taught him to hate himself for the blood in his veins. His very existence is a contradiction, an Eldian trying to prove his worth to a regime that sees him as subhuman, rejected by his father, who despises him for his mother's hidden Eldian heritage. Reiner grows up desperate for acceptance. His dream is simple yet tragic, to become a hero by joining the Marley military and inheriting the armored titan. He wants to bring honor to his mother, whose status would rise if he is chosen. He wants to matter, to be useful, to escape the humiliation of his origins. His loyalty isn't born of cruelty, but of survival. He believes in the myth of Helos. He clings to the hope that serving Marley will cleanse his bloodline and give his family a better life. But in his pursuit of this dream, Reiner becomes a cog in a genocidal machine, and unlike many of his comrades, he carries the weight of it. Guilt gnaws at him. The further he sinks into his role as a warrior, the more fractured his psyche becomes. In time, he comes to embody the very contradiction at the heart of Attack on Titan, a man torn between identities, loyalties, and truths. He is both invader and victim, monster and martyr. Through Reiner, Isayama doesn't ask to excuse evil, but to understand its roots. He dismantles the simplicity of heroes and villains and shows us how history, trauma, and ideology converge to create monsters not out of malice, but out of pain. In stepping into Reiner's shoes, we begin to grasp a fundamental truth. Empathy is not agreement, and perspective is not absolution. But understanding how someone falls is the first step toward breaking the cycle that pulled them down. Reiner Braun's assault on Paradise Island begins with conviction, but not clarity. Alongside Bertolt, Annie, and Marcel, the other young warrior candidates, trained by Marley, he embarks on a mission meant to strike at the heart of their supposed enemies. This mission, we later learn, sets in motion the very events that destroy Eren's childhood, the breaching of Wall Maria and the gruesome death of his mother. But what began as a state-sanctioned campaign soon becomes an identity-shattering ordeal. For Reiner, the journey doesn't just cross territory, it fractures the soul. During his 5-year infiltration behind enemy lines, Reiner embeds himself within the 104th Cadet Corps, living and training alongside the very people he was taught to view as demons. Yet as he eats, laughs, and bleeds with them, the illusion begins to crumble. The monsters of Marley's propaganda aren't monsters at all. They're just frightened, determined, and sometimes kind-hearted youth like him. To keep himself from disintegrating under the weight of that realization, Reiner builds a psychological wall of his own. He splits himself in two, the Marley warrior on one side, the protector and big brother of the 104th on the other. One identity to fulfill the mission, another to endure it. His charade is not a performance, it's survival. His protectiveness over comrades like Connie, Sasha, and especially Eren isn't manufactured. It's real, and that's what makes his guilt unbearable. He is the protector who brought ruin, the hero who became a butcher. If only I'd never known these people existed, he confesses one of the most haunting lines in the series. It's not a rejection of empathy, but the agony of it. Reiner is cursed by the humanity he found in his enemies. When he finally reveals his identity to Eren, it isn't a calculated move. It's a nervous breakdown. Surrounded by chaos and death, Reiner can no longer bear the psychological strain of living a lie. The revelation comes as a rupture, a breakdown of both character and narrative trust. For Eren, it is a second betrayal, even deeper than the first. He once admired Reiner, looked up to him, idolized him. In a world full of uncertainty, Reiner's courage, guidance, and strength had been anchors. To learn that this older brother was the very person who destroyed his family is a trauma beyond words. Reiner was the blueprint for the soldier Eren tried to become, and the man who shattered that very image. From there, Reiner's descent accelerates. He's the only one of the infiltrators to return home, and what awaits him is not glory, but devastation. Guilt and trauma consume him. He becomes a shell of the boy who once dreamed of being a hero. His interactions with the next generation of warriors, Falco, Gabi, are filled with wariness and restraint. He is the veteran who has seen too much, the man who knows what war really demands. Beneath his armor lies a soul eroded by PTSD, grief, and moral exhaustion. What makes Reiner such a captivating character is not his strength, but his fragility. In a world of bold ideologies and grand declarations, he is a quiet, tragic counterpoint, a man who has walked in both hells and emerged unsure whether he's still human. He is acutely aware of the Eldians' ancestral crimes and accepts Marley's fear and disgust as the price of that history. But he has also lived among the people of paradise and knows they are not monsters. That insight isolates him completely. He doesn't belong to either side, and that, too, is war's cruelest irony. The more he understands, the more alone he becomes. Personally, I never saw Reiner's depth until much later. At first, he was just the reliable blonde guy, stoic, competent, almost too perfect to be interesting. When he revealed his identity, my first reaction was denial. I thought it was a prank. Narrative bait and switch. It wasn't until the truth was made undeniable, when I watched Eren's face crumble in confusion and rage, that I began to truly see Reiner. From that point on, he was no longer a traitor. He was a contradiction I couldn't stop thinking about. I hated him, then pitied him, then admired him. His evolution reminded me of Jaime Lannister's in Game of Thrones, from detested villain to a deeply wounded man trying to crawl his way toward redemption. In the final season of Attack on Titan, Reiner's arc becomes a slow, quiet march toward redemption. He is no longer the soldier who charges into battle with certainty. Instead, he protects the younger generation, not out of blind patriotism, but out of a desperate hope that they won't repeat the same mistakes. While Eren becomes a distant, almost unknowable figure, a force of vengeance and ideology, Reiner grows increasingly human. In their tragic symmetry, we witness a powerful inversion, the former protagonist consumed by absolutism, and the former antagonist finding clarity through regret. Reiner Braun, more than anyone, embodies the emotional core of Attack on Titan's message. He is the living proof that war creates victims on all sides, that villains can be forged from good intentions, that guilt, once internalized, can become its own form of punishment, and ultimately, that redemption doesn't come from heroics, but from the quiet determination to protect life, even when you've helped destroy it. One of Attack on Titan's most powerful accomplishments is its unflinching portrayal of war, not as a theater of glory, but as a crucible of suffering. From the very beginning, the narrative confronts us with the brutal cost of combat and systematically strips away any illusion of honor that may cling to the battlefield. At first, war is romanticized through the eyes of a child. To young Eren Yeager, the soldiers of the Survey Corps, the Exploration Battalion, are the ultimate heroes. They are the blazing torch of humanity, risking their lives to reclaim the world beyond the walls. In his Na-Adva admiration, they seem noble, courageous, and larger than life. For him, joining their ranks is not just a dream, it's a calling. But this varnished image doesn't last. The moment military training begins, the recruits are faced with a very different reality. War is not a stage for ideals, it is a meat grinder. Most soldiers aren't heroes, they are terrified teenagers, many of whom signed up simply because they had nowhere else to go. Eren may be one of the few who truly enlists out of conviction, driven by rage and vengeance. Others, like Jean Kirstein, originally planned to join the Interior Military Police, not out of cowardice, but because they want safety and stability. Yet after the Battle of Trost, where he witnesses friends being devoured and entire blocks overrun by Titans, Jean changes course. He joins the Survey Corps not for glory, But out of guilt and responsibility, he wants the deaths of his comrades to mean something. Levi Ackerman, humanity's strongest soldier, is another case altogether. Coming from the underground slums, Levi didn't dream of heroism. He was dragged into the military life. Yet he rises to the top, not because he believes in the cause of eradicating Titans or unlocking cosmic truths, but because he understands that someone has to stand between humanity and extinction. If Eren is a burning flame, Levi is the steel in the darkness, a blade forged from pain and obligation. He fights not for ideology, but because in a brutal world, survival demands a sword. All right, that's it for part 1 of the Attack on Titan Deep Dive. If you stuck around till the end, seriously, thanks for hanging out. There's a lot more to unravel, and trust me, part 2 is gonna hit even harder. So, till then, take care